The Elder Scrolls Online is releasing 2 powerful new companions to add to your squad as part of its Update 44 base game patch, and I've been thoroughly testing each companion to come up with the best builds possible for any role in the game, including tanking, healing, DPS, and more, and I can't wait to share these with you in this video. Also, if you'd like more details on the builds I'm about to present, I've also got written guides for those down in the description below, so feel free to check those out as well. And let's dive right into it, starting with our first new companion, Zerith-var, a Khajiit with a mysterious history that also specializes in necromancy for his combat skills. Now, Zerith does a great job filling any role, but I feel that his specialty is more about tanking. As a tank, Zerith-var offers some very strong self-healing. You won't need to do much actually to keep him alive, even in some tougher dungeons. He also has some unique options for buffs and debuffs, which we'll look at. Plus, his necromancer style abilities just look awesome while he's holding down those bosses surrounded by floating gravestones and ghostly specters. Okay, so in terms of gear for Zerith-var as a tank, this one's going to be pretty simple. I do recommend a one-handed shield, whatever weapon that happens to be, mace, dagger, sword, axe, really does not matter. Whatever you happen to pick up is completely fine. Any shield as well. You'll just want this to make use of your basic taunt skill for companions. And then in terms of body pieces, heavy armor is going to be the best in terms of tanking, obviously. So as many pieces of heavy as possible as well. And in terms of traits, there are a couple I recommend you pick up. The first one, the one you should focus on, is Vigorous, okay? And so Vigorous increases his max health, and this is going to have to do with his skills, especially self-healing. You want him to have as much health so that those self-heals actually increase in value. And so I've got, I believe, 6 or 7 Vigorous pieces on this build. The other ones I recommend, Bolstered, does help a little bit with tougher bosses, especially to reduce some of the incoming damage. So you can add a couple of Bolstered pieces, you could add a couple of Quickened pieces, but the focus should definitely be on the Vigorous trait for him. Now let's look at skills and see why. So first skill, pretty obvious, Provoke, coming from the one hand and shield skill line. This is just your basic companion taunt. It has the shortest cooldown. It has a decent duration of about 15 seconds. So he is able to maintain aggro pretty well. Next up, and this is going to depend on your build, but I have Sepulchral Chill because this applies Major Breach to all enemies in the area. So that's about a 6k armor debuff. It's really useful if you are playing solo, for example, and especially if you don't have any skills that reduce armor. If you don't have something in your class toolkit, or if you're not running Caltrops from the Alliance War skill line, this is going to be your best in slot for that. It's super helpful. Now, if you do have that, this is going to be sort of a useless skill because you can apply this yourself, right? So in that case, you might run something else like the Perigian Armor skill. This comes from his tank skill line. This gives him Major Resolve, so he's going to take even less damage, and then he's also going to summon in ranged attackers. So that's very similar to the Necromancer armor skill. It's also going to be like a taunt effect, so I do recommend this, especially for like clearing through dungeons quickly. If you want to pull in those range enemies, that would be very useful there. The rest of his skills are simply survival, and he does a really good job of surviving, which you probably saw in the gameplay. So this skill, On Guard, is definitely crucial to that. That also comes from the One Hand and Shield skill line. That's your third ability that you get there, and that's a 25% max health damage shield. So this ends up being like around 9 to 10k depending on your Vigorous traits. And so this is really essential for survivability. I've got it first, and then I've got 2 heal skills that come in behind the damage shield. So the next one is Crescent Scythe. This skill is amazing, and I hope they keep this as is, because it's great for survival. Basically, this is like the Necromancer Scythe skill. It does AoE damage, and then it heals him back every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. And like I was talking about, this is dependent on his max health. So the more health he has, the larger the heal becomes. This has a 6-second duration and only an 8-second cooldown. That's without any quicken traits too. So he pretty much has like a 90 to 100% uptime on that heal, and it's really good. And for even more difficult bosses, you can stack this with Atoning Spirit. This comes from his healing skill line, and that's like basically the Necromancer Spirit heal. Follows him around, heals him additionally every 2 seconds for about 4k health. This has a longer cooldown, so he won't have it up all the time. But when he is getting pressured, with some big boss attacks or special abilities, that he can't block quite as well. This is going to help him heal up quicker because it's basically doubling his heal over time when it's active. And then he's got his ultimate, obviously. This is not the best ultimate. It's a little bit lackluster, but it does put minor magicka steal, which can be nice for you for longer fights. But as I said, tanking is probably my favorite role for Zerith-var, and definitely the role I think he is most suited for, but that's not all that he does well. Now, another role I think is well suited for Zerith-var is as a melee DPS, and this goes back to his self-healing potential, where he does a good job of keeping himself alive, so you just don't have to babysit him quite as much as some other companions in this game. And he also has some options for utility, as we saw with the tank focus build, so this is going to be another one of my favorite loadouts for Zerith as well. Alright, so let's talk about gear for the Zerith-var DPS build. Your main trait that I recommend here is going to be aggressive. This increases the damage that your companions do, depending on the piece. Weapons, two-handed weapons usually give a little bit more. We've gone with a greatsword here. This just sort of fits the theme of Zerith-var, what he likes to use as his main weapon. It could be anything really. I do recommend a melee weapon because of his skills that we'll be using, which we'll talk about in a minute. We've gone with the two-handed greatsword, and then in terms of the armor pieces, medium armor is also the best in terms of just armor passives. That helps your companion do the most damage possible. So as many medium armor pieces as you can get in this case. And again, aggressive is going to be the best trait. Sure, you can mix in other things. Quickened, for example, to reduce cooldowns is another very good trait to have. So it's definitely okay to mix and match pieces. Now, in terms of skills, I did go with that two-handed focus, and I just felt that really fit into the play style better for this DPS-focused setup. In terms of abilities, we're going to start with Farmina's Visage. This comes from the Warrior's Banishment skill line for Zerith-var. That's the DPS skill line. And so this is just his version of the Flame Skull's ability. It's a nice ranged damage skill, has a quick cooldown, and it's a good way to initiate combat just to get in some quick damage. We're going to follow that up with Sepulchral Chill, which is his version of Graveyard or Boneyard from the Necromancer skill line. And this one is actually really good because not only does it give you the AoE frost damage, it also gives you Major Breach. So this is going to be especially good if you are running a class that does not have access to Major Breach, especially AoE Major Breach, or if, let's say, you hate running Caltrops, you can just get Zerith-var to run this skill for you. So that also comes from the Warrior's Banishment skill line. That's the second skill he gets there. Next up is a really important skill for Zerith-var, especially being in melee range. This is Crescent Scythe. This comes from Guardian's Commitment, which is sort of like his tank-focused skill line. Now, this actually does very good damage. It has a fast cooldown, but it's also self-healing. And it ticks every 2 seconds with a 6-second duration. Now, you can see the cooldown for this skill is 8 seconds. So as long as he casts this again, within 2 seconds or so, he's basically going to be able to maintain this self-heal very close to 100% uptime, which means he's a very tanky companion. But I am focused on the two-handed skills, like I said, so I put in 2 additional two-handed skills here that I thought were good, but also fit the theme. So Sunder, this is the companion version of Carve, so it does AoE upfront damage plus damage over time. And then Sever, this is a Executioner style ability. So you can see it does a lot of damage, but it's only used when the enemy is below 25% health. So this is really nice for boss fights, especially enemies that have a lot of health. He'll be able to use this a few times. And again, both of those are from the two-handed skill line. Finally, his ultimate ability is a damage ability. It comes from the Warrior's Banishment skill line. It's called Blade of the Crossing. Really cool looking ability. It does decent damage and causes minor magicka steal. So not super impressive. I think some of the other companion ultimates are better, but it does look cool and it does definitely fit the theme of his character. So yeah, melee DPS is going to be a nice option for Zerith-var if you're not looking for a tank companion and you instead want a little more extra damage thrown into a fight. He's great at keeping himself alive and can add some extra utility, especially for some classes that don't have on-demand access to Major Breach. But next I want to talk about speccing Zerith-var as a healer build, which she can do a decent job of as well, but I don't think he's quite as strong here as he is in those other roles which we already saw. In terms of gear for Zerith-var, set up as the healer, you'll obviously want a Restoration Staff. This is going to allow you to use those Restoration Staff skill abilities, which there are a couple really good ones that you'll want in any type of companion healer rotation. I did choose Quickened for the trait here. I think stacking this is helpful for healer companions because it just means they can heal and do their buffs and heal over times more often and then even overlap those, which is kind of what we want for this particular build. Then in terms of armor pieces, light armor does have better passives when it comes to healing. This is actually going to increase the healing done per light armor piece worn. So yeah, having as many of those light armor pieces does make sense if you want your companion to have a pure healing focus. Of course, you can mix those a little bit, medium armor for more damage, heavy armor for more survival. That's totally fine. And like I said, quickened is going to be probably the trait that you want to prioritize for this healer setup. Now, in terms of skills, there are lots of really good healer skills that Zerith has in his toolkit as a necromancer, but we're starting with a restoration staff skill called Ending Incantation, and that's because this is like a buff. It's a buff and a heal, but it really boosts your spell and physical resistance very high. A 7,000 resistance buff is huge, and this stacks with your armor buff. It stacks with everything else, plus it comes with a heal. So it is nice to start off the fight this way. Then we're going to move into those necromancer style skills. Remedy of Atonement is the name for his healing skill line. And starting off with Penance of Lorcage, this is basically a burst heal or an emergency heal. So he's going to be able to use this when he or you are below 75% health. It's about a 10k heal, again, depending on your traits. But this also has a very quick cooldown, so it's nice. Then we are going to stack that with Atoning Spirit. And this is a really good heal for him as well if he gets into trouble. It's a heal over time, about 4,600 health per every 2 seconds, which is quite good. It lasts 8 seconds. It has about a 10-second cooldown with quicken traits, so it's pretty good. And we're going to stack this with 2 more heal over time effects. Rejuvenation comes from the Restoration Staff skill line, so this is about a 9k heal over 8 seconds. And then probably one of the strongest companion heals in the game, Reverse Entropy. This comes from the Mage's Guild skill line. It's one of the best reasons, honestly, to pick up the Mage's Guild for your companions because it is so strong. And with that 8-second cooldown and 8-second duration, he can basically have, a very high uptime on this skill. But yeah, we are stacking heal over times. We got a couple of buffs, and yeah, very effective as a healer. Of course, the ultimate isn't going to do much for that, but it does help stack some extra magicka recovery. Now, there was one more build that I wanted to create for Zerith-var, which is a bit more thematic, and that is specializing him as a necromancer with some frost magic elements thrown in for good measure. Now, initially, I tried to build him as a pure necromancer setup, and he does have some abilities that support that, like a tether skill, for example, that requires a corpse to cast, but he also doesn't have much in terms of corpse generation skills, so more times than not, he just couldn't use that skill at all, unless maybe you're also a necromancer as well. That might work. So instead here, I decided to supplement this with some frost magic abilities, which I think really hit the sweet spot in terms of theme, while actually still being a well-balanced build. Okay, so for this setup, with its particular focus on ice magic, you're going to want to pick up an ice staff. So that's going to change some of our destruction staff skills into ice skills to match with some of the necromancer ice magic. Any trait really is fine. I picked aggressive for this build just to increase damage. And actually, I've put as many aggressive traits as I can on the gear pieces as well. And then medium armor, like we talked about with the DPS focus build, the melee build, medium armor does have damage passives, so you'll increase his damage done with those medium armor pieces. You can mix in other traits. I have a couple of quicken jewelry pieces here just to reduce cooldowns. But in terms of skills, this is where I've mixed in those necromancer and ice magic skills. Starting with actually a really good skill, Dark Moon Totem. This comes from Guardian's Commitment, so it's a tank focus skill. This is a ranged fear ability, so he's going to apply it at the feet of an enemy, usually the first enemy that you attack, and it does an AoE fear combined with minor protection, so it gives you a little bit of damage reduction as well. With quicken traits, you can get this down to about a 10-second cooldown, so you can use this pretty often, and it is nice, especially when grinding experience or trying to get through a dungeon quickly, just to have those enemies kind of frozen in place. It does make things a lot easier. And next up, we have another ice skill, Sepulchral Chill, is that AoE frost damage skill that also applies Major Breach. So Zeriths and your abilities will end up doing more damage once this goes down. Great, like I said, if you don't have access to this in your toolkit, but it's also a nice AoE frost damage skill. That one comes from his damage skill line, by the way, Warrior's Banishment. That's the second ability there. Then we have just 2 Destruction Staff abilities. That's why we're using the Ice Staff. So Elemental Barricade, that's basically your Wall of Elements style ability, does AoE damage. And then Arcane Nova. Frost Nova can apply the chill status effect. So you can get things like enemies rooted in place when you have all of your other, frost effects down in the area. So that's really nice. And then we just have a basic damage skill here, Varmina's Visage. That comes from Warrior's Banishment as well. It's flame damage. It's sort of the, the Necro Skull ability, but it unleashes this awesome screaming audio effect. So I like to throw it into the build. Feels very Necromancer when it comes out in the rotation. So this is another one of my favorites. This sort of combination of Zerith-var as a Necromancer / Ice Mage build. Definitely recommend you check this one as well if this appeals to you. Up next is our second companion named Tanlorin, who offers an interesting mix of abilities from both the Dragonite skill line and something we haven't seen yet for companions, and that is soul magic skills. This was really interesting to play around with while still creating some builds that I thought fit well into those traditional tank, healer, and DPS roles. And I think I came up with some really good options here. Let's start out with Tanlorin spec as a tank build, which is going to offer some good self-healing along with potential for greater protection thanks to some damage shields. In terms of gear for Tanlorin as a tank, you will obviously need a sword and shield combination. This is going to give you access to those important tanking skills like taunts, damage shields, etc. The one-handed weapon does not matter, but in terms of armor pieces, I do recommend heavy, as you saw with the Zerith tank build. This just gives you optimal damage reduction. So you could definitely include a wider variety of traits here than Vigorous. You could include some more bolstered traits here, or as always, Quickened is a great trait for companions to reduce those cooldowns. But in terms of skills, I do recommend with that combination of Provoke and On Guard. Both of those come from the one-hand and shield skill line. So Provoke is your taunt skill, On Guard is your damage shield. And then we're basically using a combination of healing and defensive Dragonite style abilities. The first of those is called Haze of Cinders. This comes from the Radiating Heart skill line, so actually kind of nice. It's a combination of snare, a strong 70% snare in the area, and then an AoE heal over time, about 1800 health every 2 seconds. Now, I wish that health did scale with like max health, for example, but it seems to be just a static value. But it does not. So it's a little bit on the smaller side, but keep in mind it is AoE, so you can stand in that area and you can get the healing as well. Now combined with that, we're going to use Kindle. Kindle is a direct heal with only an 8-second cooldown. So this is nice when a boss delivers a big heavy attack, for example. They need to heal up quickly. Kindle is going to be very good for that. You can get healed from Kindle as well. And then I threw in Igneous Armor. This is supposedly giving major resolve, as well as a 6k damage shield. Scaling off of max health, but it doesn't seem to be that high. So who knows, this may get buffed in the future. But that's it in terms of tanking abilities. And then the ultimate here comes from the Empathetic Fighter skill line. It's called Ruinous Outburst. This does like a wave of magic damage, a frontal effect, some secondary magic damage, and then a knockback and a stun. So this is actually kind of nice for tanking as an ultimate. Similar to Bastion's ultimate, which is more of like a AoE, but this is focused in front. So Tanlorin can definitely survive as a tank against many bosses, but with less consistent healing overall compared to Zerith-var, I'm not sure that this is the best possible role for them. Up next, let's check out Tanlorin's Healer focus build, which is actually very similar to Zerith-var in terms of gear loadout and the actual abilities used, because healer companions do tend to use those weapon skills from the restoration staff more often than anything else, obviously, as well as a really strong healing ability from the Mages Guild skill line. So that's basically what we'll see here. So for this build, which is focused on healing, we'll want to start with a restoration staff, best quality that you can get. I prefer quicken traits typically on my companion healers just to make those heal over times and those buff effects happen a little bit more often, but you can mix and match this trait, obviously. Getting companion gear in light armor is going to be best in terms of healing because of the passive bonuses. For companions, the more light armor pieces, the more bonus to healing that you get. And again, you can combine traits. Quickened is one of my favorites, but you could also use the Soothing trait, which increases healing power as well. So that's what I would recommend there. And then in terms of skills, again, we're going to be mixing primarily restoration staff skills and sort of those Dragonite theme skills. But let's check out the restoration staff first. So Mending Incantation, this is just a nice defensive buff and heal combination. That's the second skill from the Restoration Staff skill line for companions. And then we're using that Haze of Cinders ability. This is a nice AoE snare and heal over time. That comes from the Radiating Heart skill line. And then we're using Kindle, which is a very nice direct heal. This can be used either on the companion or yourself, whoever has the lowest health. Next up, I do recommend Rejuvenation from the Restoration Staff skill line. Again, this is just another one of those heal over time effects that you can actually stack up. And we've combined that with Reverse Entropy. This comes from the Mages Guild skill line, and it is another very powerful heal over time effect. You can see the tooltip there with about an 8-second cooldown. The ultimate ability isn't ideal for a healer, especially since they'll be mostly at range distance. And this is more of a melee effect, but it can be useful, if you get surrounded by a group of enemies. So healer is definitely a strong role for Tanlorin, though probably not the best in terms of using their actual unique skills. I think I've saved the best for last in that regard, which is specializing Tanlorin as a melee DPS build with that focus on soul magic. So let's check that one out next. The great thing about running Tanlorin as a DPS build is that you're going to get to take advantage of those unique soul magic skills in their toolkit, which are basically all damage focused skills, including a soul magic ultimate here, which looks really good and actually does decent damage as well. This is definitely the most unique and successful build, I think, for Tanlorin's abilities, so I definitely recommend you check this one out. Now, in terms of the gear for setting up Tanlorin as a DPS, I do think that melee is basically the way to go with this particular companion. That mostly has to do with their skills, which we'll get to in a minute. But for this, I've gone with dual wield, so I've got the companion's dagger and axe. Does not really matter which weapons you pick up for this, so you could even use 2 daggers. It does not matter in terms of passives. What you do want, I think, though, in terms of traits, is the aggressive trait. That's going to be optimal in terms of maximizing damage output for these skills. And so to do that, you can get the aggressive trait, and that's going to be the best in slot. Combined with medium armor pieces, again, those have the better passives in terms of increased damage for your companion. So yeah, you can basically run everything as the aggressive trait. If you want to maximize that damage, of course you can combine other things like vigorous trait for survivability and quickened for reduced cooldown. Those would be some of the better options. Now, in terms of skills, like we talked about, a lot of Tanlorin's DPS skills come from this soul magic skill line called Empathic Fighter. And there's a mix here between like single target, ranged, and even area of effect skills. So that's why I thought the melee approach or the dual wield setup worked best in this particular case. With that, we have the skill called Razor Cape as the first slot here. This also gives them a 20% damage shield. That's for 8 seconds, so that is really nice in terms of survivability, plus damage over time, obviously. And then we're just using those 3 damage skills. We've got Shattered Spirit, which is a bit like a single target dot, which then explodes into AoE damage. So I think it's good to slot this early or one of the first slots so that you can take advantage of that explosion. Then we've got Explosive Fortitude. This is that AoE damage component I was talking about. And then Internal Conflict is a single target damage over time. So there is a lot of variety here. And then I've just combined that with the Spinning Steel ability. That's also from the dual wield skill line. That does some nice execute damage if the enemy is below 25% health. So that's nice to throw into the end of the priorities there. And of course, the ultimate here, Ruinous Outburst, is a melee skill, and this can hit up to 2 times. So this works out well on the build also. So yeah, Tanlorin as a DPS, definitely a strong way to go with this particular companion. But with that said, don't forget, we do have written guides for all my companion builds, linked down below in the description, in case you need to reference those. And now we're also continuing to update our members-only builds and guides on this channel, including the unkillable Magicka Dragonite build you saw me playing during this video, which has over 50k in damage shields, tons of self-healing and survivability, and it's perfect for any content in the game, whether it's solo or not. That off-meta build and many more are available to our Tier 2 channel members called the Elite Squad, plus even more perks like early access to videos and members-only Discord. So if that sounds good to you, just click on the join button down below or the members link in the description to see everything we have on offer, and make sure to select the Tier 2 Elite Squad as your membership option. Huge shout out as always to our members who make this channel possible. I could not do what I do without you. So thanks again. Thanks to all of you for watching this video. And as always, I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.